today's World Insight. The Summit of the Americas commences in Los Angeles, with some notable absentees. Can the U.S. rekindle ties with its Latin American neighbors?
Hello, I'm Tian Wei, and welcome to World Insight. The 9th Summit of the Americas hosted by the U.S. begins this week in Los Angeles. It comes amid the Russian-Ukraine conflict, and the U.S. is busy with promoting its interactions with what it calls the Indo-Pacific. Before the summit starts, the gathering has already encountered controversy, ideological discord over who to invite, skepticism about the U.S. commitment to Latin America, and how expectations are likely to be met for major accords on issues such as migration and economic cooperation. The decision to exclude Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, countries seen as non-democratic in the eyes of the U.S., have resulted in the leaders of other countries, including Mexico, threatening to stay away. Some analysts suggest that the U.S. attention to Latin America has waned in recent years, with more than a third of the 33 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean lacking a U.S. ambassador. So what will the summit turn out to be? Are there going to be real content? For whom? Let's loop in our panelists. I'm so glad to be joined in Caracas, Tamir Porras, who is the former Venezuelan Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs under Hugo Chavez. In Boston, George Han, who is a research professor at the Pardee School of the Global Studies from Boston University and former Chilean ambassador to China. In Beijing, last but not least, Jiang Shixue, director of the Center for Latin American Studies with Shanghai University. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. The Summit of the Americas. Now, at this moment, when geopolitics becoming ever more complicated, Mr. Ambassador, tell me about your take on what is likely to be agenda and how the countries in Americas are varied in their approach on the latest issues.
The Summit of the Americas that was originally established in 1994 during the presidency of Bill Clinton has performed a not insignificant role in providing a platform for the presidents of Latin America and the Caribbean and United States, Canada, to get together and discuss issues of common concern. Latin America and also North America has basically been ground zero of the pandemic. We have nearly 3 million deaths from COVID-19, and the pandemic still continues to be present throughout the Americas. In that sense, and also because of the very severe economic crisis that Latin America has gone through, let us not forget ECLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin America, said that 2020 was the worst economic crisis Latin America had seen in 120 years. So things are really bad. It's important to get together and to discuss issues of common concern. Unfortunately, I would say, this summit has missed the opportunity to really bring the Americas together by playing on dividing the region and putting the issue of not inviting particular countries, 3 countries, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, to the summit. A number of presidents have said they will not attend. The president of Mexico, most notably, has confirmed he will not be going. And that, it seems to me, has cast a bit of a shadow over this exercise that otherwise could have been so much more fruitful.
Tell me more, Mr. Porras, about the lack of consistency coming from the U.S. side. What does that mean? What does that say to the countries in the Americas?
You know that the United States, given its power, economic power, political power, its military might, tends to play a hegemonic role in the region and somehow wants to impose the agenda on the conversation that is being had around the region, and you see the reflection of that around the debate on the absence of invitation for three countries that are not aligned with the United States in their foreign policy. And therefore, again, this affects the possibility of the Summit of the Americas to address a common agenda. Second, I would tell that during the last probably 2 decades, the geopolitical influence of the summit of the United States government has somehow decreased. The region is much more politically diverse. The influence of emerging powers like China, for instance, in the region has been growing, the economic influence too, and therefore it is more difficult for any US administration to lead, if you will, the discussion and to impose the agenda in the region. And you can see that reflection in this, somehow disappointing attendance. This is a summit that wants to bring the region together, but the problem is that it wants to bring it to an agenda that is centered around the concerns of the U.S. government rather than the rest of the region. The reality is that for the Biden administration, it is paramount once again to please or to try to limit the damage of inviting what are perceived as non-aligned government and limit the impact that it has in the Florida state, where a large community of Cuban Americans and Venezuelan American exiles, which are very hostile to the governments of those countries, again would see that as a friendly gesture. The United States during the last few years also has not had a very consistent policy vis-a-vis Latin America. We saw during the Trump years this manifestation of the America First, a very self-centered agenda that basically had very little impact in the rest of the region, if not for the extremely hostile policy that the Trump administration deployed vis-a-vis Venezuela, for instance, imposing sanctions and promoting regime change. But for the rest of the region, the United States was pretty much absent. And now, under a Democratic administration, there is this attempt, if you will, to reach out to the region, but again, with very little credibility, given the inconsistencies of the past.
Professor Jiang, you are the only Chinese sitting among the panelists. Some would say, wow, the Chinese journalists ask these questions. Maybe China is being cynical. How is articulate its relations with countries in the Americas, while the US is trying to, at this administration, during this hour, engage with the rest of America?
We often say that Latin America in particular is faced with the so-called twin pandemic, a pandemic of COVID-19 and a pandemic of poverty. And Latin America needs external assistance from the outside. So we believe that the US should play an important role in helping Latin America to deal with these kind of issues. However, we are very disappointed to see that the US is starting the so-called failure of the Summit of the Americas. For China, well, China is happy to see that Latin America can become more and more prosperous. And the bilateral relationship between the US and Latin America could be improved. We hope that the US can pay more attention to Latin America. After all, Latin America, it's as a region is its neighbor. We do not say this region is the backyard of the US. But we hope that they should be partners.
Ambassador, how do you see, and also how do you see your fellow colleagues and counterparts in the Americas see the issue of China and the United States? What do you think about the state of China-US relations, and how would Latin America the Americans countries will be able to tread the line that would make you have the best benefits while also be supportive for peace, not only in the region, but beyond?
It seems to me that the way forward is by following a certain approach, an approach that I and two colleagues of mine, Carlos Fortin and Carlos Ominami, have referred to in a recent book as active non-alignment. And what we call is for a policy in which Latin American countries do not take sides, that they choose to side either with Washington or with Beijing. This approach takes a page from the old non-aligned movement of the 1950s and 60s, but adapts it to the 21st century. It is not a defensive position, but rather it is an assertive position that realizes that we live today in a very different world, one in which the global South has taken a preeminent role in world affairs, one in which the old diplomacy, the cahier de doléances of the old third world, asking for massive transfers of resources from the north to the south, is obsolete. Today, we have what has been called collective financial statecraft, in which you have banks like the Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank, based in Beijing, the New Development Bank, based in Shanghai, which are able to provide funds, they're able to provide loans to the countries of the global south. We have entities like the BRICS. There are some very interesting developments. Argentina, I read, may join the BRICS. Indonesia may join it as well. So we have a new South. And in those terms, this policy of active non-alignment, it seems to me, opens enormous possibilities.
Do you see there is space for you to explore in that sense?
Yes, very much so. And this is, in fact, what a number of countries are already doing. You know, this is not a proposal for some foreseeable future. If we look at the reaction of countries, for example, on the war in Ukraine and on the sanctions that Western countries want to impose on Russia, there's been very strong pushback on that by countries like Brazil, like Mexico, like Argentina, that are not willing to sacrifice their economies for the sake of sanctions on Russia. So what we have is the emergence of this new sense of non-alignment. You can also see it elsewhere, the position that South Africa has taken on the situation in Ukraine, the position that India has taken. So I think this very much responds to the needs of our time. And active non-alignment is very much the way forward.
Well, you know, in the past 2 or 3 decades, China has been proposing for a so-called triangulation of cooperation for the US, China, and Latin America. So we can say that it's something like a triple cooperation, or we may say triangulation for US, China, and Latin America. Latin America welcomes this kind of triangulation. So we are going to see triple win, 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 win. However, the US is not interested in this kind of triangulation. So we are going to find out something which can be realistic for this kind of a triple cooperation.
Do you see there's also still space and possibility about China-US cooperate in the third-party regions and countries in this sense, the Americas, as China and the US with the latest speech made by the Secretary of State from the US side, even though stating that the US is now seeking kind of rivalry with China, and yet within the context, it's all about competition, if not rivalry.
You know, China wants to cooperate with Europe in their bilateral relationship with Africa. So in Africa, China wants to have the so-called triangulation for Europe, China, and Africa. And for Latin America, as I said just now, we are going to have this kind of triangulation. Now, China even suggests that we have Belt Road, and the US has a special program. In Spanish, it's called America Crece, and in English, it's called America Growth. It's also a kind of investment program. So as a Chinese scholar, I published an article suggesting that we can put these two initiatives together. Of course,
do you see it's realistic?
I think it's realistic if the US government can put down its outdated Monroe Doctrine.
Mr. Porras, do you see that's possible that China and the US could cooperate in the third-party regions like the Americas? Do you see that possibility as realistic?
Well, I would perceive more China and the United States as rivals, if you will, in the region, in the sense that China has become a very, very important partner for Latin American countries since, despite its global relevance and its of China becoming the #1 economy in the world. So, despite playing this role of global leader, China has an approach to foreign policy that pleases, if you will, Latin American countries in the sense that it perceives itself as a developing country too. The Chinese proposal to Latin America is a win-win situation for developing nations. And in that sense, China has much to offer. It has, financial cooperation to offer. It has technology to offer. And at the same time, it doesn't pretend to export to Latin America its own political model. China is very respectful, if you will, of the internal politics of Latin American countries, which is not exactly, if you will, the tradition of the United States in the region that, of course, seeks its economic interests, but that also advances political interests. The United States has a very, very long history of interference in Latin America and sees itself as a model that needs to somehow orient or influence the political life of Latin American countries. And this is something that creates tension between Latin America and the United States. So again, I would perceive, if you will, China more as a counter model of cooperation in the region, and the growing influence of China over the last 2 decades, and mostly an economic and financial influence has become a matter of concern for the United States. That again, when the conditions, political conditions in the United States are met, for instance, where there is a democratic administration, tries to reach out to the region in order to limit the influence of external powers as China is.
Ask all of you on some concrete issues, particularly the Russian-Ukraine conflict that has been a paramount event that has given different parties the stage of putting forward very different perspectives about the future of the world. One of the key issues is economic impact. How do you see what the American countries are facing right now as a result of this conflict and the policies taken by various Western countries for sanctions against Russia?
Yes, let me say the following. One sort of reading of the war in Ukraine has been that it somehow has put the conflict between democracy and autocracy, between democracy and authoritarianism, and they put that front and center. I totally disagree. I think that is a misreading of what has happened. Some of the leading democracies in the global south, like I said earlier, India, South Africa, Brazil, have not bought into this notion. What I would argue is that the war in Ukraine has brought to the fore that the real cleavage in today's world is not between democracy and authoritarianism. It is between the global north and the global south. And that, it seems to me, has been brought to the fore with particular strength. And the position that, again, countries like Mexico, like Brazil, like Argentina have taken is particularly noteworthy. Why? Because the war is very brutal. There's been a violation of international law. You would think that there would be, a near consensus on condemning that and also supporting the sanctions on Russia. Yet that has not been the case. And it seems to me what has happened is that countries in the global south have realized that they have to look out for their own interests. Why should they sacrifice their own interest for supporting these Western sanctions? India is an excellent case. India has been pressured not to buy oil from Russia. And India says, Germany is buying oil from Russia every day, and you are telling us not to buy oil from Russia? It's absurd.
Mr. Porras, from the country where you are from, in Caracas, Venezuela is rich in natural resources, particularly fossil fuel energy. And how do you see the latest changes in the world, including that conflict, is having an impact on your economy, both challenges and opportunities?
Well, paradoxically, I said before that Venezuela and the United States do not have a very good relationship, quite the opposite. But at the same time, the breaking of the breakthrough, of the war in Ukraine and the crisis it generated around the supply of fossil fuels and in particular oil gave an opportunity, if you will, for the governments of Venezuela and the United States to start a conversation. Last March, on March the 5th, for the very first time in many, many years, an envoy of the United States government flew to Caracas in order to reach out to the Maduro government and to put on the table the possibility of reaching some sort of oil deal between the two countries, and the United States government issuing licenses to US companies like Chevron, for instance, which is a multinational oil company that's very present in Venezuela, in order to increase the output of oil. So somehow, paradoxically, the war in Ukraine created this opportunity for Venezuela and the United States to address a common agenda, which is the energy supply, and probably brought the Biden administration in a more active, more proactive attitude vis-a-vis Venezuela, and opened the perspective of softening the sanctions. So that would be, if you will, probably the positive forecast, the positive impacts. Also putting into the basket, of course, the increase in the in oil prices that somehow has also benefited oil-producing countries like Venezuela. And on the other hand, of course, most Latin American countries, and Venezuela is now alien to that, are very much exposed to the evolutions of the world economy, are very much dependent on imports. And of course, we export raw materials, but we import a lot of consumable goods. So on the other hand, Latin America is very much sensitive to the world economy, and inflation and increase of uncertainty is also impacting negatively the region and Venezuela as the rest of the Latin American countries.
Professor Jiang, things are evolving very fast, and there are very proactive engagement by some countries to the rest of the region and the rest of the world. Now, how do you see the role that Latin American countries are playing in today's geopolitics, and also in maintaining peace and stability of our world today?
Well, as you know, Latin America has 33 countries and almost 600 million people. So it should play a very important role in maintaining world peace and development, in pushing forward global governance, and so on and so forth. Well, the war in Ukraine has some kind of negative impact on the region. And also the war has some kind of indirect impact on China's relationship with Latin America. You know, China-Latin America relationship is moving forward rapidly. However, this kind of bilateral relationship should develop within an environment with world peace and prosperity. I hope that at this summit, Latin American countries will ask the US not to make the war worse and worse, not to supply more weapons for Ukraine, okay? Because, you know, the US has played a very, very big negative role in the war in Ukraine.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Hen, Mr. Borlas, and Professor Jiang. Thank you and take care. And that's a discussion on the Summit of the Americas. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of my team. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.